The beholder shoots its disintegration ray at you, tearing everything apart along its path. Roll me a dexterity save or die. Oh, that's only a 14. You are dead. Man, that's my third character this campaign. How's it going, and welcome to No Fun Allowed's How to GM series, and today I want to talk about the lethality rate in our games. For the most part, if you're playing a tabletop system, you probably have health, and that implies that if your health drops to a certain degree, then you're going to die. But the real question is do we kill off our characters all the time, or is this something that rarely occurs? I think that there's three major schools we can look at in regards of this equation. The first being the game system that we're playing, the second one being the player acceptance, and the third being the story of the game. So first off, let's look at the game system. If you're running 5th edition, rules as written, it's sort of hard to get killed, right? You have to go down to 0 HP, and then you have to fail 3 death saving throws, and typically that's a little bit hard because on average you are going to succeed on a death saving throw, or someone could just run up and cast a healing spell and you are safe, or whatever the case may be. It is typically harder to die. More often than not, lethality is in the early stages of the game where someone dies outright because of major damage or because they happen to fall or whatever the case may be. It is typically harder to kill a 5th edition character. But then we can take a look at the beginning stages of D&D, all the way back to original D&D, where you died when you dropped to 0 HP. And also very important was the fact that your hit points were extremely low. It was very common to have a character that only had 2, 3, 4 HP at levels 1, and maybe even further beyond. So lethality was much more commonplace. But of course, there's many game systems in between. There are some game systems where it is flat out impossible to die because it is all about building up these characters into awesome individuals, or maybe it's more so about the roleplay than it is about the combat. And then, of course, we have the inverse, where someone can just sneeze at a character and they die, and player-character turnover is extremely frequent. In between those two major extremes, we, of course, have game systems where death can occur, but it's not very likely. It's somewhere in between, and that's perfectly fine. The game system that you're playing truly does dictate the storytelling of the game, and if the storytelling dictates that PCs regularly die, then that is to be expected. And that is going to lead us into the second equation here, the player buy-in. Now, I've met players of all various different mindsets here. I've met some who would not want to play in a game where their character could die, and I've met plenty that relish the idea of characters dying, because that means they can bring in some new character and roll up stats again, or whatever else. What's important here is you need to be playing in a game where everyone is on board, because if you have 2 or more people of those extremes in the same party, where characters are dying regularly, or no character dies, then of course there is going to be mixed receptions here, and that's not something you want. This is something where you need to state ahead of time whether character death is frequent or infrequent, or maybe somewhere in between, and hopefully you can get the right players with those tempered expectations. And the third topic here is the story. Does the story is the story hinged upon the characters surviving? Yes or no? If the adventure you're playing in or the story you are telling needs certain characters to live, then that is just something that is ingrained into the game. But of course, you can run an adventure or tell a story that isn't required to have everybody live. In fact, I think that there is certain cases where you can have TBKs happen all the time, and that could even enhance the story. Something important to note here is if the story does require that the characters live, then people are going to recognize that. Some people may accept that, and that's perfectly fine. But of course, some people may metagame that. And you do have to sit down with your players and have that talk of what is acceptable and what is not. If people think to themselves, oh, it's impossible for me to die, then of course they're going to have these ideas of, oh, if I can't die, then I can do stupid things. Or maybe if we get into these combats, then I've got nothing to worry about. And then you also have that inverse of if characters are dying all the time, then maybe you have people that don't grow any attachments at all to their characters, and thus it feels like an empty game where these gray blobs march along and just continue on with whatever they perceive to be the game. You have to have the expectations of the game already laid out to the players, and you need to find a group that is willing to accept whatever it is that you want to play in. So how high are lethality rates in our games? Well, I can't tell you because every single table is different. Of course, you're going to have those tables where everybody dies all the time, and you're going to have those tables where no one dies all the time, and then you're going to have those tables where some people die every once in a while. There is no universal code to this thing. What I'll go ahead and tell you from my experience is I blatantly tell all the players at my table that lethality is there in the game. No matter what game system I'm running, you have the capability of dying. But what I always tell my players is, with a combination of good tactics, good dice rolls, you will succeed. You will make it through to the other side. However, a combination of bad dice rolls and bad tactics will guarantee that you fail. And then, of course, there's that big gap in between where a combination of good tactics but bad dice rolls could lead to some death, while at the same time, a combination of bad tactics but good dice rolls could also lead to some death. When I tell my players this, they know those expectations. No one comes to my table thinking that they're all going to make it out okay, because they know that there is the potential of dying. And for me personally, I think that's healthy. I love the idea that people get attached to these characters because they know if they mess up, they could die. Not all the time, not every session PCs are dying, but it happens frequently enough that they know that they need to get smarter, they need to get luckier in order to succeed. I know that if certain players showed up to my table and knew that characters couldn't die, I know that they'll approach that situation far differently if they know that their PC will die. They may not be dumb enough to beat the trap with their face. They may not be dumb enough to pick fights with certain people that they shouldn't pick fights with, etc., etc. That's personally just my game, but I've talked to many DMs who like to run a non-lethal game, and I've talked to plenty of DMs where lethality is commonplace. Overall, the lethality rate in our games isn't what matters. It's getting a group of players that are willing to accept that lethality rate. So go ahead and tell me, do you have a group that fits your lethality rate perfectly? Or do you think that you want to turn it up or turn it down a notch? Is death very commonplace in your games, or does death never come up? Do you modify the game system that you're running to adhere to what your players want? Go ahead and tell me all of those things because I want to know. But that's going to do it for me. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And thank you to my amazing patrons. You guys are absolutely incredible. And I cannot wait to see you all in the next one.